Hey everyone, it's Skye here. It's the last Friday of the month, and normally we would release the latest episode of French Friday, where I have a conversation with our friend David French about the latest things going on in the world, politics, law, and the church. Unfortunately, because of an unexpected family commitment, David French was unable to record this week, and so we've had to delay the newest French Friday. But to hold you over, we've included the latest episode of the Movie Proposal podcast, which is another show I do about twice a month with my good friend Josh Lindsay and someone you already know, Jason Cinnamon Roll Rugg. The Movie Proposal isn't your typical movie review podcast because of two things. Number one, it often incorporates Christian values and worldview into the way we think about these films and TV shows that we review. And the other thing is we have a strange convention, a matrimonial one, where we look at something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue, which you'll figure out when you listen to the show. And then Josh and I also give our proposals for whatever the new movie is that we're reviewing. So here's our latest episode of the Movie Proposal where we talk about Operation Mincemeat, which is a recent Netflix movie. I hope you enjoy this, and if you do, be sure to check out the rest of our episodes and subscribe to the Movie Proposal. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon with a regular episode of French Friday. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here to talk about the movies. Welcome to episode 130 of the Movie Proposal. I'm Skye Jatani, co-host of the Holy Post podcast, and joining me is Josh Lindsay.
Hello, everyone.
And Jason Rugg is along, who's been missing from the Holy Post. So if you don't get him there, you can get him here.
Hey there.
And he might be a little winded because he forgot we were recording this, and he was out on a walk, and a text came, and he had to run home.
I literally ran home.
So glad you came prepared.
Yeah. I did watch the movie. We're good.
All right. Well, as always, we're going to talk about movies in a matrimonial format, something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue. And something old is always a movie that's at least 20 years old that we want to re-recommend, may or may not be related to our something new movie. Josh, what are you bringing us?
Okay. I love this movie. It is 20 years old. It's from 2002. It's only related to our something new that it has British actors, and I'm sure there's some kind of overlap with the films in some way, but it's the 2002 Hugh Grant About a Boy.
Oh, yeah. I think
Have
I
you guys
saw it
seen that?
once.
Once? Oh,
Yeah, it's not one of those like, oh, I'm flipping through the channels, About a Boy's on. Let me sit and watch it. It's not.
I disagree. I watch
Okay.
this one, I don't know, maybe once every 5 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Hugh Grant, which most people are familiar with, Toni Collette, who she became famous from The Sixth Sense, fabulous actress, Nicholas Hoult, who in this film, he is a boy, but people might recognize him from Mad Max Fury Road. He's in the X-Men films and a bunch of other things. But Hugh Grant he's kind of this bachelor. He inherited a ton of money from his father, so he's very wealthy. He has no job, and he's super self-absorbed. And as life happens, his life crosses paths with this boy who's kind of an awkward kid. You would never put these two together, but basically he teaches him to be a selfless person, and it's a very sweet story. It's a feel-good story. It's funny,
It's based
super
on a
entertaining.
book, isn't it?
That I don't know.
I think it's based on
It
a book.
is Nick Hornby wrote the novel.
That's right. Yeah, and he's had some of his other novels turned into movies, I believe.
Wow, you know more than I do. I had no idea.
Yeah.
The thing I liked about this film is it's different film for Hugh Grant, where he's in a lot of romantic comedies.
Yeah.
And this is borderline romantic comedy, but it's not about him falling in love with a woman. It's about him, like he's cute and adorable and people like him, but he's also very selfish. And so it's really about him just changing. And so you kind of fall in love with these characters. But if you haven't seen it, highly recommend it.
And that was sort of when Hugh Grant was at the peak of his popularity before his implosion. Right?
Yeah. Did he? I mean,
he had some, I forget what it was. Would he get busted for soliciting prostitution or something like that?
But then I don't think that really hurt him.
But he okay, whether or not that was what hurt him, he's not as visible as he used to be. I mean, he's still doing films, but he's not like this huge box office draw like he was when he did
No, that's true. That's true. But
Notting Hill with
he is
Julia
acting
Roberts.
again. Well, that's true. Yeah, he is acting again. Like, well, speaking of Julia Roberts, you mean like Hugh Grant, Julia Roberts, several actors of those that stature who were like, box office draws at one point,
Yeah.
not so much anymore, are acting again, and now they're doing limited series. So Julia Roberts just came out in a limited series about Watergate. Hugh Grant was in a limited series where he played a man accused of murder with Nicole Kidman.
Right. I
So
saw that.
yeah, so he's out there.
Yeah, he is. That's true. I do recall liking that movie. I don't recall much about the movie, but I recall liking it. So, okay,
It's a
great.
great, and actually, it's not a bad Christmas film too. I don't know what it is with British films and Christmas, but there's a kind of a Christmas theme running throughout it. So
Well, maybe
maybe
it's
watch it at Christmas time.
we have some subconscious draw to like a Dickens-esque
There you go.
accent for Christmas.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, my something. I'm a sucker for World War II movies. I just ever since I was a kid, I've loved them. Um, and so because there's something new as a World War II movie, I say, okay, what World War II movies have I not recommended already that are great? And there's so many fantastic World War II movies. One of my favorites is Patton from 1970, starring George C. Scott. I believe he got an Oscar for his performance. Are you guys familiar with? Have you watched this movie?
Oh yeah.
Oh
I've
yeah.
seen parts of it. I don't think I've seen it start to
Oh
finish.
Josh.
That's
I
so
know.
good.
First of all, he's just one of these characters that he's bigger than fiction. Like you couldn't write a character like George Patton. I mean, it's just insane. Um, and this film has probably one of the most iconic opening scenes in cinema history, and one of the most iconic opening lines in cinema history. It's just fantastic. I think the screenplay was written, or at least written in part, by Francis Ford Coppola.
Oh,
Although he didn't make the film, he's not the director. But it's the story of George Patton, who was a World War II general, and first part of the movie is about his campaign in North Africa against Rommel, the famous German commander, and then Patton's forces help lead the invasion of Sicily and Italy, during that part of the war. Then in Northern Europe, he's the commander of the Battle of the Bulge that takes the Allied forces into Germany. My grandmother was actually a part of his army. She was an army nurse in the Third Army and was part of the Battle of the Bulge and all that sort of stuff. But the guy was kind of nuts, and he was um, reprimanded for his brutality toward his own troops. He believed he was the reincarnation of other past great generals,
for
and
real?
oh, for real, yeah. I mean, he would like be on a battlefield and be like, I've been here before, and it was so many centuries
Oh.
ago. He was just a weird dude, and yet it's just a great movie, a crazy character, amazing bit of history, um, brilliant acting. There's so many moments from this movie, from the music to the opening scene, other stuff that you'll be like, oh, that's where that's from. Oh, that's who started that. That's where it's just you have to see this movie. It's well worth your time, and you learn a bit or two about at least the European campaign of World War II. So,
Is this like a 4 hour long film? How long is it?
I don't
It's
know,
almost
Jason.
3 hours.
Yeah, it's
Almost
long.
3 hours.
It's
Okay.
long, but it's from that era. It's sort of the Lawrence of Arabia-esque
Right.
kind of. And there's so many other great movies. We've talked, I think, about The Great Escape before, Bridge on the River Kwai, The Guns of Navarone. There's the Dirty Dozen. There's just so many great World War II movies, which some are more accurate than others, or some are more rooted in history rather than just historical fiction. But Patton, you got to do it. You got to
All
watch
right.
it.
Okay.
Take the time. Okay, our something new is a Netflix movie that was recently released called Operation Mincemeat. Josh, can you give us the summary?
Yes. During World War II, two intelligent officers used a corpse and false papers to outwit German troops. So, based on a true story, one of the greatest, I don't know what do you describe it, deceptions, in a war. And I apparently never made into a film until now. It is on Netflix. It's directed by John Madden, who's famous for Shakespeare in Love. Fantastic film. Starring Colin Firth, who you might know from The King's Speech, also great film. Matthew McFadden,
Yeah,
He's
he's
from
he's he's in Succession.
yeah, not so great. Anyway, Kelly McDonald,
I think
who
Succession is great, and he's a
I
really good
know, I
actor.
know.
But
Um, the female actress Kelly McDonald, it was driving me bonkers. Like, how do I know her? And you would recognize her from No Country for Old Men. She plays Josh Brolin's wife, and then she's the voice of the lead in Pixar's Brave. And once
oh
I
wow,
looked that up on IMDb, I could relax and watch the rest of the film because I I couldn't place her. I didn't know where she was from. Anyway,
okay. So Josh, you want to give us your proposal for the
yeah.
movie?
So I enjoyed the film. I thought it was very good. I wouldn't necessarily say it was a home run, but definitely worth seeing. Great. It's on Netflix. You can stream it very easily. And again, definitely worth seeing. My proposal is I propose Operation Mincemeat is a good example of using fiction to tell a true story. So often when there's a true story, filmmakers have to embellish, they have to shorten things, they have to move timelines around in order to tell a compelling story, which sometimes bothers people because like, well, that didn't really happen and so on. This one is interesting because it's a film about deception and making up a story. So the premise is the Allies want to trick Germany by making them think they're going to attack Greece when really they want to attack Sicily. And if they trick them to think they're attacking Greece, then Germany will send their soldiers to Greece, and the attack on Sicily will be much easier. The premise is we find a corpse, we put in fake documents, secret fake documents saying we're going to attack Greece. They drop this body in the ocean near Spain, and Spain is neutral at this point, and they know they're gonna share these secrets with Germany and so on. So they have to create this story about this dead soldier. So it was obviously a real person, but they had to make up a name and there was all this backstory, his love interest, and just the things they put in his pockets. And but in doing that, it's this like the characters almost fall into a like their own romanticized stories of fiction of their own lives, where Colin Firth is in a marriage that is teetering on is it going to last, is it not going to last, and he's falling in love with this other woman, and he's romanticizing about what life could be, what love was supposed to be about, and so I thought it was great that they were able to take that theme of fiction and making up stories in the midst of actually doing that for this real story.
Yeah,
So quite frankly, that's what made it compelling, because the problem with some World War II stories are we know the ending, like we know the good guys win, so there has to be more in it. And so you're not, spoiler, you're not surprised that the deception worked. What you're surprised about or what you're interested in finding out is, well, what happens to these characters? What happens to the guy's wife? What happens to another character's brother? This female lead, does she find love, and so on. And so I I think John Madden, I don't know, I mean, he directed it, so I'm not how I don't know how involved he was in writing the story, but I think he did a great job of taking those elements and applying it to this particular story. And I wasn't as interested in what was true or not. I got the hey, it worked out. I was compelled by the character stories.
yeah. I think I agree with you completely there. A couple of weeks ago, a couple episodes ago, I mentioned another Netflix movie, World War II Netflix movie I watched called Munich: The Edge of War.
Mm-hmm.
And how it's riveting and it's super suspenseful and it's kind of a spy, who done it tension thing, and great movie. But what really annoyed me about the whole thing, it was totally fiction. Though it was set in World War II and around
Right,
World War
right.
II and all that, it was a total fiction. And it kind of annoyed me because they made a great movie, but it's not real. And this has the other challenge, which is it's real, but you have to somehow create more interest and tension for the audience. And purely as a story, I don't think it's as tense as Munich, but the fact that it's real makes it understandable. And your observation, Josh, is a really good one. Like these folks are deep up to their eyebrows in deception, and in spycraft, and they succumb to some of their own product, right? Their own lives kind of become very complicated because of what they're ingesting. It's like somebody who works at McDonald's. You're sorry, you're going to gain weight and have bad cholesterol. Like you just can't not. Like it's a byproduct.
Everyone who works at McDonald's.
Everyone, right? Or it's kind of the stereotype of the bartender who's an alcoholic. Well, it's an occupational hazard that
Right,
you're
right,
around a
right.
lot of alcohol. Right? Same thing. Like you're surrounded by deception and manipulation and all the time, and so those things seep into your life, and you can see how it begins to sever the bonds of this team as they're trying to work together, and their own family secrets and things start becoming issues, and affairs are happening. So that makes it really intriguing. But just on the historical level, like I said before, I'm a sucker for World War II movies, so I really enjoyed this one. It wasn't exactly what I expected, because from the trailer I thought it was going to be a bit more comedic and a little bit
Really?
more, yeah, I mean, not like slapstick, but like a little bit like, here's this goofy team of misfits,
Oh, I got you.
who are pulling into this really far-fetched ploy.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
it was a bit darker and more serious than I expected it to be, and somber, but still a great story. I don't think I gave my proposal, but let me just say, I think this is another one of those movies. I'd propose that it's another one of those movies that shows that truth can be stranger than fiction, and sometimes even more compelling. Jason, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say that I thought exactly what you said. I thought it was gonna be more of a comedy, and then there were moments where it kind of was. Like the
Yeah.
tone felt super weird. It would shift
Mm,
from these really dark moments of like, yeah, we kind of have to lie to this lady about what we're doing with her dead brother's corpse. But then
Mm-hmm.
we're also gonna have this fun little montage where we're kind of just playing around and having fun. it's just, it
like
was
taking
Right.
his picture. Yeah,
it
yeah.
was a little bit weird to me. Like that took me out of it a little bit. And I get that it was ridiculous and those things they were doing were actually ridiculous.
Yeah.
But sometimes the tone shift kind of caught me a couple
Yeah,
times.
there were some Weekend at Bernie's kind of moments that you're like,
Yeah.
this is really goofy, but it's really dark and really somber as well.
Yeah.
Um, One of the other pieces of the story that I wasn't prepared for was one of the side characters is Ian Fleming,
Right.
who was it was actually his plan. He's the one who came up with this whole idea, and because he worked for the Ministry of whatever it was at the time, and was involved in all kind of espionage projects in World War II. And if you don't know the name, he's the guy who wrote James Bond. He created the
Hmm.
James Bond character and books, which then, of course, became the movies. So the fact that Ian Fleming is sitting there in the room concocting this whole plan, and is at the beginning, he's the narrator of the
Right.
movie. That's a weird, true connection, which was fascinating. I also thought that the acting in this movie was really well done. Like, these are complicated. To your point, Jason, it goes from comedic moments to serious and dark moments, and the actors, I thought, did a fantastic job in it. So I loved it. I thought it was a great film. I'll probably watch it again at some point. And to get into the history of it a little bit, and this is the connection to Patton, the Allied invasion of Sicily, which then became the liberation of Italy, or the overthrow of Mussolini in Italy, that was a campaign partly led by George Patton in the Third Army. Uh, and had this ridiculous ploy to put this body in the water near Spain with the fake papers not worked, it could have been a bloodbath. It could have been a slaughter. But the other side of it, which they illuminate, which I didn't know, is that this plan probably didn't really work, but there were people within the Nazi regime who were against Hitler, that were conspiring against Hitler at this point, and they kind of helped move this plan along, not in cooperation or communication with the British Secret Service, but they understood this is probably a plant, right? This is probably papers and information that was intended to mislead us. But there were people within the Nazi regime who let it go anyway to Hitler's desk and everything, because they also wanted Hitler to be overthrown. So there's a lot of, like, it's a reminder that so much of history is the product of accident and serendipity.
Hmm.
Like, you can't control the way these things happen sometimes, but wow. The other thing it reminded me of was The Imitation Game. If you remember that movie with
Benedict
Doctor
Cumberbatch.
Strange, yeah, and about Alan Turing, who invented this massive computer to decode the Enigma encryption machines that the Nazis were using to communicate to their submarines. And so that kind of, it's just those stories I find absolutely enthralling and fascinating. Anything else about the movie we should
Well,
unpack here?
yeah, I just thought that, a lot of we like to romanticize World War II. Like, I mean, there are a lot of World War II movies, and just it almost seems idyllic. Just the way they dressed and they spoke and how they treat each other, and they were all on the same page. They were united, and but I got to imagine the people who were home, you know, just working jobs and just day to day life while a world war was going on. It was tiresome and draining and just took a toll, and it wasn't really romantic. And so I thought it was interesting that this theme of dreaming what a more romantic life and an adventure and there's throughout the film they point out there's all these people who are writing novels, just
Yeah.
dreaming up, and Ian Fleming being one of them. And so, but at the end, when, again, spoiler, when Colin Firth is clearly in love with this woman, and she probably has feelings for him too. I mean, she says, "You have a wife, you have kids, and you're going to go back to them," and he does. And so I I thought that was interesting that um, it was almost acknowledging in a subtle way just how we romanticize things, but it's not. It's made up. It's not real, and it's not what we ultimately want. We think we may want that, but that's not what we're really looking for. And so I found it to be very satisfying that they told the story in this way, that whether there was a love triangle or not, that's it's not a question of maybe there was, maybe there wasn't, but just how it played out that theme of, war is hard, and we romanticize things, we make things up, and when it really boils down to it, what really matters is what they pointed out here. And so I appreciate about that film. I just like how they intertwine these themes in the midst of this great deception and fiction.
Yeah, it's worth watching for sure. And in an age today where so much of global warfare, I'm using air quotes, is about deception and lies and fake news and internet bots and misdirection, you can see the seeds of all of that 70, 80 years ago in World War II and what it has become now. And to going back to that original point you made, Josh, of them kind of getting caught up in their own lies, it's just it's a cautionary tale to remember that you end up absorbing the kind of work you do, like the values that you marinate in all day and that you propagate. There's a risk to that. And so yeah, it was there's so many levels at which we could unpack this thing. But did you happen to find any sources that talk about the movie and determine if it's like how much is fictionalized, how much was accurate? A lot
Oh,
of times you
funny
do
you
that
should
with these
say
kinds of
that.
movies.
Yes, yes. For our something borrowed, there is an article from Time where it does talk about what's fact and what's fiction, and we'll have it in the show notes. We'll let everyone read it, but the gist of it was they were very true to the actual events. So everything that was done for the deception, trying to deceive the Germans, was pretty spot on. The parts that were made up did these three characters have a love triangle? One of the characters, Colin Firth, had a brother who was a communist, or at least a communist sympathizer, and in the film, they're spying on the brother to see if he's a Russian spy. In reality, that wasn't much of a concern for some reason back then. They just kind of heightened that and made it a bigger deal in the film. But in terms of the actual events of this deception, they stayed true to the story.
All right. I will check out that article because I'm intrigued by it.
But I have a part two for something borrowed.
Oh,
Yes, this is unique. One of our listeners, I happened to mention before, Cody Benjamin, he he works for CBS Sports, and he compiled a book of essays. He asked me to write an essay, which I don't write. That's not my thing. But it's now published. So Skye, I'm published.
On
I'm now in
CBS
the same.
Sports?
Yeah. Well, that's just his day job. The book is
Oh,
his, um, but this is called Movies from the Mountaintop, 100 plus films that express God, explore faith, and enlighten church. The tagline is, we all have our favorite movies, but the best films don't just stick with us. They shake us, they stir us, they inspire us, they move us. What if they are also divine? What if intentionally or not, they express God, explore faith, and can even enlighten our churches? And so he got a group of film critics and I think pastors and writers and movie lovers to write essays. And I wrote one in there. So we'll put the link in there if you want to order the book. But this is
nice.
probably the only writing I'll ever do.
So
So
what
take
did you
advantage.
what did you write about? What did you contribute?
So I wrote about the film Shall We Dance?
I
I mentioned
hated
this
that
film.
movie.
Oh my gosh. First of all, you didn't see the right one. You saw the Richard Gere one, right?
Yeah, with Jennifer
Yeah.
Lopez.
Yeah. You rightly so. You hated that film. You needed to see the Japanese one, the original one, the one that they copied from.
Oh.
It's a sweet love story, and I just related to it because when I was a kid, my parents danced a lot, and as a kid, it was embarrassing. I would hide behind the couch. I like to dance in the foyer, and it was it was like watching your parents kiss or something. You're like, gross, right? Fast forward, I actually fell in love with dancing when swing was popular in the 90s. I was actually in swing dance competitions. It was a lot of fun. And so they use dance as this theme of, because there's a partner, right? There's
Right.
two people dancing and how it plays out in marriage. And I talked about this in another episode. I don't want to spoil it for people. It's such a great film. You need to see the Japanese version of Shall We Dance. That's the best one.
All right.
But anyway, I don't. You could just. I don't want to get into what I wrote about. You should read it.
Of course. Should read it.
But that was the film I talked about, and how I think I actually used the scripture. Focus on whatever is true, whatever is lovely, whatever is noble, praiseworthy.
Uh-huh.
Focus on those things. And so the guy in the story was focusing on the wrong things, and through the story, he learns to focus on the good things.
So I joked about hating that movie, at least the American version of the movie, but I actually wrote something years ago, an article about a line from that movie, which it still stands out to me. There's I don't know if it's in the Japanese version as well, but in the American version, Richard Gere and Jennifer Lopez are having some kind of conversation about what's the point of marriage. Do you remember this? And
No, go ahead.
she says something like, we get married because we want a witness to our lives, somebody who notices us and can, see our lives and bear witness to it. Anyway, it was an interesting comment, and that's the only part of the movie I liked or retained. But I ended up writing a whole piece about that, and
Oh,
not about marriage, but how our desire to be seen and witnessed is what fuels a lot of our engagement on social media in a really unhealthy way. And the Christian answer to that in Psalm 139 and other places is God is our witness. God's the one who witnesses our lives. We don't need a human witness to validate who we are and what we are and what we do. So anyway, there are some nuggets. I mean, even a broken watch is right twice a day. Like, you can see a lousy movie and take away some kernel of insight or truth or illumination. So, but I trust you. I trust the Japanese version of the movie is even better. So
there's got to be more to marriage than just being seen. Because after a while, you're like, you're just gonna get tired being seen by that same person over and over again, right? There has to be more.
I'm sure. I mean, I don't think she was meaning that to be comprehensive, and I don't think she meant it literally, like someone whose eyeballs are watching me, right? But
I know.
it's the minutia of one's life is being shared with another, so it gives it a sense of me. It's
That's
it's the old adage: if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? It's like, if there's no one else in my life to share, does my life matter? Does it make a
right.
difference if no one else has shared that falling tree?
Well, that's the line from Avatar, where she says, the love interest says, to the other one, I see you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part where we all melt, right? Where we like, oh, they love each other. See, Avatar gets it.
I don't remember anything about that movie.
right, let's move on to our final segment, something blue. This is when we share something we've seen recently that blew our minds or was so terrible that it blew chunks. And Jason, you've been quiet most of this show. Did you even see this stupid mincemeat movie?
Yeah, I did. I said the
You
tone
just
was
have
weird.
nothing. Yeah, but you
It was
didn't.
the main thing that it made me think of was, do you guys remember that movie, that Tom Cruise movie, Valkyrie?
Oh
Yes.
yeah.
It made me think of that movie because I think that's the same character they're talking about who's working behind the scenes to overthrow Hitler, right?
I think
Oh.
so. Yeah.
I think that's Klaus von Straffenberg or something. I think that's him. And
Yeah.
I love that movie when I saw it. I remember
If
Mhm.
they if
it
they
coming
gave
out.
him an eye patch in Operation Mincemeat, then I would have connected the dots.
Or if he'd been played by Tom Cruise in a
Or
cameo.
played by Tom Cruise. That would have.
He comes back with
Right.
his 3 fingers or whatever. Yeah.
Oh, I just want to say, since you brought up Tom Cruise, this has nothing to do with Tom Cruise, except that he's a recognizable actor, and that would not have worked in Operation Mincemeat. The bartender in the film Operation Mincemeat, I
Yeah.
immediately recognized him. And my first thought was, I've seen this guy in other movies. Why is he in such a small role? And it tipped me off that, oh, he's not in such a small role after all. And
Mm-hmm.
so they picked the wrong guy, because I didn't know where he's from, but I've seen him in a bunch of stuff. So
Oh, come
they
on,
needed.
Josh. I didn't notice him.
Well,
You just have some encyclopedic visual memory of every actor you've ever seen.
I actually just encountered this because of a totally different thing. I just recently watched True Detective for the first time. Have
Mm-hmm.
either of you seen True Detective?
oh
I've
yeah.
caught pieces here and there.
Okay, so don't want to spoil too much, but the bad guy in True Detective in the first season um, went on to become a really much more prolific actor, particularly in HBO shows, because he
Oh,
did so well in
True
True
Detective.
Detective. And so when he shows up and he's just this little bit part, I was just like,
right.
oh, I bet that's him, because it's like that
Oh,
is going to be important later. And so I had the reverse, because I watched something that was older, and
Yeah.
now he's become more prolific
mm.
because of that role, and I didn't realize it. So yeah,
Hmm.
I
What do you
believe you,
think of
Josh. I
True?
believe you. I didn't
Okay, thank
recognize the
you.
bartender though. I don't know where you saw him from.
I don't.
I'm sure IMBD is your friend. You can find out pretty quick.
Yeah.
Um, okay. Anyway, something blue. Something that blew your mind, blew chunks recently. Jason, what have you got?
All right. So if you know me, you've listened to this podcast a little bit, or you've been on my Twitter, you know how much I love the show Barry, which is in its
Mhm.
3rd season right now.
Mm-hmm. Bill Hader.
Um, yeah, it's fantastic. And Josh, you're watching it. Skye,
Oh,
have
yeah.
you watched any of the show?
I've seen a couple episodes.
Okay. Um, there is a fantastic companion podcast called the Prestige TV Podcast, where they do recaps of various TV shows. And they're doing a series every single time that a Barry episode comes out. They have Bill Hader on, and he talks about the entire process of making that episode. And
Hmm.
so he talks about the rewrites, the scenes they shot the first time, why they didn't work, when they got to the edit and they go, "Hey, this scene is focused on the wrong thing, and now the end of the episode doesn't work. We need to go back and reshoot that." And
Hmm.
he breaks down how they're writing the show, and he breaks down how they're writing jokes, and it is fantastic. If you're watching, yeah, you have to watch the show along with it, otherwise it won't make any sense whatsoever. But it is fantastic and really, really interesting if you love the nuts and bolts of how a show gets made.
It's funny, so often in these segments of Something Blue, you bring up some resource that gives greater insight into how to make something, how to edit, how to write, how to produce, what's something. So I know that's where your brain is a lot of the time, but that's really interesting. And especially when you can get one of the primary creators explaining it, even
Yeah,
better.
because Bill Hader actually directed about half the episodes this season, and
Mm-hmm.
was one of the co-creators in the writers' room. And so, and the crazy cool thing about it is how humble he is, where he's just like, "Yeah, I didn't come up with that. One of our writers," and he names them, came up with that, and I had written something that was really stupid and wouldn't have worked, but it was fun to write. That's what he talks about in this last episode. It's just like, I get caught up on writing something that's really fun to write and doesn't do anything. And it's really cool to hear somebody who is that prolific and really, really good at what he does and is still willing to say, and I screw up sometimes.
Hmm.
That is really, it's really cool. He's really humble, and I just absolutely love it. It's totally worth the time. If you're watching Barry, you got to be listening to this podcast.
All right. Josh, what have you got?
I love Barry. I hated it after one episode in season 1, I think, or I don't know, but I got back on and it's so good.
It's so good.
I'm going to check out this podcast. I've got 2. The first one blew my mind. It's a series on Apple TV. It's called Be Home Before Dark. Think of like Nancy Drew, but in present day, there's a precocious young girl. I think she's 9 or 10 years old. Her father's a journalist. She wants to be a journalist. And so she's solving murders and crimes, basically. And so it's a little far-fetched. Some of the things that happen, you're like, okay, that's not going to happen. But who cares? Like, we've been watching this with my 12-year-old daughter. She loves it. It's good enough to engage my wife and I. I think there's now 2 seasons. It's actually based on a real person, interestingly enough, not Nancy Drew, some other young girl. But it's on Apple TV, so you got to have that to watch it. But I don't know how we came across it. I mean, I think Angie heard about it or something. I never heard anything about it, and I would say it is above average, right? Not not the greatest thing ever, but like it's entertaining. And
this segment is called Something Blue. That means it needs to blow your mind.
I know.
Not something above average.
I know, but that's so hard to find for a 47-year-old man and a 12-year-old girl to watch a show together. That blows my mind.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, I have a question, Josh. I remember hearing about this. So Dana Fox is one of the creators of the show, and I remember listening to a podcast with her when the pandemic hit and they had to shut down all the productions. They were like, I want to say less than a week away from being done shooting season 1 when the lockdowns happened. And they were really worried about their main actress aging up for those last scenes. They were really worried about that because was that noticeable? Was there anything like that in the show that you noticed?
No, it did not stand out to me. No.
Okay.
But if that actress had a bit part in some show 20 years ago, he would have noticed. Of course, just a kid. She wouldn't have been 20 years ago. But yeah.
Right.
Or maybe her mother was an actress.
I know.
A generation ago, and you're like, wow, the resemblance is really strong. Let me look up where I saw her before, and it was on some episode of The Love Boat in 1982.
It's probably happened. All right, okay. This blew chunks, like legitimately. All right. My wife is a big fan of Ozark, and I watched season 1. I wasn't a huge fan. I skipped season 2 and 3. And then I heard season 4 was the last one. And she was going to watch it. So I'll watch it with you. And so I watched the recap videos on YouTube. So I got caught up and everything. And the ending, it blew chunks. Like it ended and we both like said, what? That's it? That's how it ended? And we were mad. You're kind of like, this would never happen. Like the character wouldn't have done that. It just is not adding up. We wish different people would have died who didn't die, And what makes me mad is I'm a huge fan of Breaking Bad. And to me, this was a giant ripoff. You can just line up characters. This was Walter White. This was his wife. This was Jesse Pinkman, and I'm like, how did he, I like Jason Bateman and he's good in this. And he made a show that has a big following. So kudos to him. But how he got away with ripping off Breaking Bad blows my mind. If you want to watch a show like that, Breaking Bad, it's so good. Like, for crying out loud. Ozark made me so mad. It was so, but
all
it blew chunks.
I've never watched it, so no, I won't.
Well, don't.
It's it's hard. Not that I'm excusing this, but it's hard to land the plane. Like, taking off is relatively easy, flying is relatively easy. Landing is the hard part. That's where most accidents occur. And I had a preaching professor once tell me, like, one of the hardest things in preaching is how you end, like how you wrap up, like making it, landing the plane, sticking the landing, whatever metaphor you want to use. And we've seen this over and over and over again with great shows or series. Like, you're in, and then they just flub the ending. Seinfeld, perhaps most famously, like, what a terrible final episode. So sometimes you just have to enjoy something for what it was and just be like, oh, ignore the ending.
Oh, okay. But okay. The ending was bad, but the show in general was bad. I mean,
Okay.
it wasn't engaged. I don't like, I just kept waiting for it to get good, and it just didn't happen.
All right. Well, I have two. One very brief because I think you mentioned it a couple weeks ago, Josh, but I finally caught up to it, and that is the fourth season? Fourth season of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
just finished that with my wife, and I thought it was way better than the previous season.
Wow.
I really enjoyed this season. It was really very funny. The parts I liked most about it were the side characters, especially
Yeah.
Maisel's parents and her dad, who's
Yes.
played
Yes.
by Tony
Yes.
Shalhoub.
Yep.
Just I could watch a whole movie or TV show with just that character. Um, Thoroughly enjoyed it. The thing I want to spend more time on is also a Blue Mind, but for a different reason. Is HBO has a new 2-part documentary. I think it's 4 hours almost total about George Carlin, the comedian.
Mhm.
It's called George Carlin's American Dream. And it's obviously the story of George Carlin's life. And if you don't know much about George Carlin, I don't know how many years ago he died now, but he started his comedy career back in the 1950s and was a very straight-laced kind of 50s television guy, short hair, tie, suit, the whole thing. And then into the later 60s and 70s, completely transformed into more of a counterculture hippie type, drug using, long haired, bearded, against the man sort of comic. In that era, he also got heavily involved in drug use. In the 1980s, he kind of had this um, low period where his comedy just wasn't working well anymore. It was a low point in his life, and then had this renaissance, this resurgence in the mid to late 80s and into the 90s, where he's older man, obviously at that point, and took on a far more socially active, political kind of tone to his comedy. Didn't always agree with him, but he was really smart. He's famous for his 7 words you can't say on television, which that case actually went all the way to the Supreme Court.
Really?
But the reason that I found this documentary intriguing is two things. Number one, through the story of George Carlin, you really see the story of the last 60 some years of American history. And his transformation of his comedy kind of parallels the transformations of American society and what's been going on. So that's kind of an interesting glimpse into it. But then the other thing I found intriguing about this guy is that he was this walking set of contradictions and paradoxes. So he grew up as a Roman Catholic Irish kid in New York, and like one of his famous reoccurring things in his comedy was how much he hated religion. A little bit like Ricky Gervais today, who's kind of famous for using his atheism and anti-religion in his comedy. So was George Carlin, mocked it all the time, and um, towards the end of his life and the end of his comedy, he got really, really, really dark and negative and kind of nihilistic, to the point where, like, so much of his comedy had been about calling humanity to be better. Like, we need to, be more generous and less racist and more, but by the end of his life, he became so negative because he didn't see the changes and improvements, to the point where they have interviews of him saying things like, I no longer care what happens to humanity. I don't care what happens to anybody. Humans are a silly species, and I do my comedy as if I'm on another planet observing these silly, ridiculous people, and I don't give a crap what happens to them anymore. Like, just dark nihilism. But you could see it being like the natural outcome of his worldview. Like, he doesn't believe in a God. He doesn't believe any of it ultimately matters, and he had this really negative kind of point of view. So on the one hand, you got that. On the other hand, one of the dominant themes of this documentary is his love of his wife. And they were married for, I think, close to 40 years before she died of cancer. And like, it's very clear that he was a very dedicated husband, and she was a raging alcoholic while he was a raging drug addict. And it was a devastating season in their marriage, but they both got sober, and they had this kind of renewal of their love and commitment to. And in a Hollywood career where that's pretty rare, here's this guy who shows deep personal integrity and devotion, but on a macro level, hates humanity and has no hope and no charity and no kindness, but on a personal level, he does. So I just found it an incredibly intriguing look at a complicated character who through his life and comedy reveals the contradictions and development of American culture. So can't recommend it enough. George Carlin's American. Have either of you guys seen this or seen the trailers for it?
Saw the trailer. Yeah,
Saw the
it's
trailer.
on HBO. Is that right?
Yeah, and they interview like other comics like Seinfeld and Stephen Colbert and a bunch of others throughout the series about the influence of George Carlin. But it's really it's fascinating.
Did they talk about his stint on Thomas the Train? Wasn't he on Thomas the Train?
Yes. Yeah, not Thomas the Train. It was some other kids show in the 80s, early 90s, I think. Was it Thomas the Train?
I thought it
don't know.
was.
Maybe it was.
He was a train engineer. Where,
Yeah. And he was in Bill and Ted's.
Shining Time Station.
That's it.
That's the show?
That's what it says.
Yeah.
1989. One season. And yeah, there he is.
And he was in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Oh, right.
Rufus, I think is his character name. When you see the breadth of what he did in his career, I mean, he was Johnny Carson's guest host frequently in the 70s, early 80s season of the Tonight Show. But he had real highs and real lows, and it's just a dramatic, interesting, fascinating story, and messy, very, very messy, but definitely worth your time. All right, before we go, we have some like big stuff coming up with the Obi-Wan Kenobi series is debuting. Stranger Things season 4 is debuting. We got the Top Gun Maverick movie coming out, which I had absolutely zero interest in because I've ranted on this podcast many times about the lack of imagination and originality in Hollywood. But this frigging movie is getting outrageous reviews, and people some people are actually saying it's one of the greatest movies ever made.
What?
I know, that's ridiculous hyperbole. But now I feel like I have to see it just so I can be disappointed. Because when you build it up that high.
Yeah, I want to see it.
So there's a lot to talk about in the next couple episodes. So we want to hear from you guys about what we should prioritize that we talk about because we can't do it all at once. So go on Twitter, go on Facebook, go on wherever you can find us and let us know your thoughts. Any closing announcements you guys need to make?
No, I just, again, want to say thank you for everyone who posts reviews and comments. Very encouraging. Keep it up. And please refer the podcast to your friends.
Yeah, that's how people find out about it. If you can rate us, if you can like us, if you can share the podcast on your social media, it'll help us reach more folks. So thanks for being a part of it. Until next time, you can kiss this episode goodbye.
No.
Well, haven't seen you for a while. How's Ned?
Who? Oh, he's a load of crap. Doesn't exist. Yeah, made him up.
You made him up?
Yeah, to meet women.
You're sick.
Yeah.